And then I'm going to hand it off to Andrew, who helped coordinate our collaboration today.
Thank you all for coming out tonight, and thank you to the PyData folks for sponsoring really cool events like this that bring people together to learn, listen, collaborate, network. It's really nice having these opportunities in Chicago where after a long day, we can actually learn from other folks that do what we do. A little about Audion. Most folks here probably never heard of Audion. You know, we are a company, we've been around for almost 20 years. We are based in Amsterdam. We are a fintech company. We have over 29 offices around the globe, but we are relatively new to Chicago. We just opened our doors here in May of 2022. And really the backstory of Audion, you know, we started in the payment space, really to create kind of a seamless experience for really large enterprise merchants. You know, our merchants are Spotify, Netflix, Uber, really big clients that have presence all over the world. As we started growing more and more in North America, it became essential for us to build a tech hub. As we were exploring where to build a tech hub 3 years ago, there were a lot of ideas, a lot of thoughts on where we should have this tech hub. After years of doing extensive research, we landed on Chicago. You know, Chicago made a lot of sense. It was pretty centralized between our coastal offices. There's a huge community here, a tech community, an educational community here. And it really embodied, Chicago really embodied kind of Audion in a sense. It has kind of a gritty, kind of hardworking kind of city that I think really embodies the true nature of Audion. Today, you know, for everyone coming out tonight, we have two speakers that both work here at Audion. One on the data engineering side, Maria, who has a really great presentation on validation-driven development, and Rebecca on the data science side, really talking about AI models and a product that she developed herself, which is pretty cool. And I think it really shows at Audion that people can have a full-time job, but we really encourage people to explore creative outlets outside of work to really pursue their passions. So it's going to be pretty engaging. So please, everyone, ask questions tonight. You know, let's make it an interactive conversation. Afterwards, we will be around a little bit if you want to talk to folks, network, really kind of collaborate. We are here, but enjoy. And the floor is yours, Maria.
Thank you. I thought I'd save the fun presentation for last. Cool. So I'm Maria. I've been at Audion for 2 years now. So shortly after we opened up the Chicago office, I'm a data engineer. I've actually been an engineer for almost 15 years now, but I've worked across the stack. I just got into data recently and just decided to stick with it. And I work in the bank reporting team that's based here out of Chicago. So a little bit of context about Audion. As Andrew mentioned, we process payments, but we're also a bank. So the area of work that we do is financial reporting on the bank side. So the money that's in your account, the activity on the account. So there's the payment processing side and the bank side. So that's primarily what we do here in Chicago. And our reports are now in big data. A lot of the work that we've been doing the last 2 years is migrating our reports from the legacy system in Postgres to a more scalable and distributed platform on big data. And the technologies that we use are Spark for the processor. Is everyone familiar with Spark here? Does anyone work with Spark? Cool, good amount of people. We use Airflow as the orchestrator. We use HDFS as the storage layer, and then Kafka for streaming data into our big data platform. And we still have a dependency on Postgres. It's not going away. We just don't use it for generating our reports anymore. So we're fully on big data, and it's an exciting time to be a data engineer at Audion. So my talk is called validation-driven development, but has anyone heard the term test-driven development? Show of hands. Okay. Has anyone read this book? Cool. So yeah, Test-driven development, also known as TDD, is just a way of developing. Basically, you let your test define what your code should be doing rather than write the code first and then write the test later. And this book, when it was written, kind of sparked a movement almost. Like when people say they do TDD, this book encompasses what that is. But just as a quick review, no, TDD is all about starting with your test, and then the test guides what your implementation should look like. So you don't have to read the book. I'll give you a quick recap. You write a failing test. You make the test pass with a very, very minimal code necessary, and then you refactor and you make sure it continues passing. That's basically the cycle of TDD. So you keep doing that until you have basically full test coverage, and then you also have your code complete. Typically, we start with the code first and then write the test later, and then realize we might have some gaps in our testing, or maybe we wrote code that wasn't needed. So that's one of the benefits here. And I think the interesting thing is that the key thing is you implement the minimal required code to make the test pass. So what does that look like? If we take this example, I'm going to write a failing test. And I copied this from the book. So we're going to assert that, $5 equals $5, right? And we're going to implement what equals does. And the minimal way to make this test pass is to literally return true. This feels wrong, right? We know this is not the implementation, but this is TDD. So, okay, we'll entertain it. The test passes. Okay, now, if you want more test coverage and better test coverage, you need to write another failing test case. So we're going to assert that 5 equals 6, and we expect false. So now our test is going to fail because we were returning true. And now we actually get to the implementation of what that would look like. So that's TDD in a nutshell. And when we worked on our code base, we followed TDD just out of personal preference. And when we looked at our coverage, we saw we had 97% test coverage. So it does work if you're going after test coverage in your code base as well. But I think the important thing about TDD and this way of developing is that testing is part of the development process. It's not really something you do after. And you're going to get more feedback if you do the testing earlier rather than do it later. And you don't have to be religious about it. You don't have to have a failing test every time, but just keep in mind that there's more benefit. You're going to get more feedback if you do it earlier. Because a lot of times, this is the plan that we have. If we have a project where we're going to research, we're going to implement, we're going to test, and then we're going to deliver. It's going to be done, right? But I think we all know that the reality is that you question if you even designed the right thing or if you built the right thing from your testing results, right? And sometimes, worst case scenario, you have to redesign, scrap what you wrote. You have to re-implement, you have to do more testing, fixes. It's kind of a back and forth process. It's not so linear to get to the finish line. And I think something that's more realistic and ideal is if we test frequently. So as we're implementing, we test frequently. If you define your tests up front, you can even use those tests to verify your research before you dive into actually implementing and making the changes. So you'll get the feedback much sooner if you're in a time crunch. But TDD is very popular in the software engineering community, but how can we apply it to data engineering? So we could write validations first, and then we could use those as our test cases. For those of you that work with data, how many of you also write validations? Okay. Are we familiar with what they are? Does someone want to say what they are? Yeah, so I'll repeat that for offline or online folks. Basically, yeah, there are checks that you put in place to make sure your data looks as expected. If we wanted to ask Google, More specifically, it's the process of checking the accuracy and quality of data before it's used, imported, or processed. So because we work in financial reporting, as you can imagine, it's kind of important that we are, reporting on correct amounts. Because how concerned would you be if your bank statement was incorrect? Like, that's not a good look for a financial institution or really anyone working with money. So for us, accuracy is very important. And if we were to, again, revisit some of the software engineering principles, and in this case, the testing pyramid, your unit tests are at the bottom, integration tests in the middle, and the end-to-end tests at the top. So in this case, validations kind of falls more into your integration tests. So a unit test is really only testing a function, like a unit of code. Integration is a little bit beyond that. It's multiple units of code, right? And end-to-end is kind of the very, very top of the pyramid, where you literally have a test where the browser opens, you click on a button, and then you see the results. So the value of validations is that you're really checking against data that's actually out there versus mocking, which is usually what we do with unit tests. So the types of validations that I mainly wanted to cover is row level and table level. And yeah, these validations apply to data. So I'm assuming you have a table that you're trying to add checks to. So a row level validation is just scoped to that table row, which means you're really looking at the columns, and you want to check if the column is populated in these cases, or this column should never be empty, or this column should actually match a phone number because I expect it to be a phone number. See, these are the kind of checks you would add to a row. Table level validations make sure that you have complete data within your table. So you're not missing any rows. You don't have any duplicate rows. And then, also that your data reconciles against another data point as a way to make sure you have completeness. So one example I wanted to go over where we decided to try a validation first approach was the payout report. So sometime earlier this year, we had to work on a new report. And this just shows that all the transfers that took place in your payout when you got a deposit. This was a brand new report, so we didn't have it before. And the expectation is basically that when a payout takes place, you should have your, we have this column called the rolling balance, which should show you what the balance of your account is. So as you can see, it might be a little small, but when a payout happens, your balance is almost always zero if you're going to do a full payout. So it's almost like a balance sheet. Like, our merchants use this to just keep their books up to date. And just a little bit of context on how merchants use our reports. Our reports are used by other companies' financial sectors, so they ingest them and they make sure that the data is complete on their end, so they have to close the books at the end of the month. And they need very detailed information like this. So this is just a sample, but in reality, this could be like a 2 GB file. It could be, depending on how much volume you process with us, like merchants need like a item level overview of all the activity that happened on our platform. And then also what their bank accounts, what the balance is during that activity. So this is just a sample payout report. This is what we had to build. So we started with a validation where, okay, before we really write too much of our query and the logic, we started with this validation that the rolling balance, this highlighted column, should be the account balance. So that's where we started. And I talked a little bit about reconciliation, but just to go over what that means. Are people familiar with this term, reconciliation? It's a bit of a financial term, but it just means that it's an accounting process where you compare two data sets. So what the merchant has on their end should match what we're reporting to them, essentially. But we also use it internally to validate. So, okay, what our report is displaying should actually match what the account is. So that's kind of what I mean with reconciliation. And this allows us to make sure we don't have duplicates and we don't have missing data, and then everything matches to the penny, essentially. So this is probably very, very small, but so the first implementation or iteration of this report, we added a check to make sure that, hey, alert us or tell us how many times the balance does not equal 0, because actually we didn't have the data in place yet to know what the account amount should be, but we knew that most of the time it will be 0. So we started with that, and we ended up with 15% inaccuracy. So 85% of the payouts were correct. They did match 0. 15% did not. So then this was a good starting point. We knew that, okay, our query is mostly correct, but maybe we should take a look at this 15% and figure out why it's there. So we went in and we made we investigated, and then we just made the fixes necessary to get the score to be better. So again, in TDD fashion is like, what's the minimal amount of work I have to do to just get a better score and get the test to pass? So we made a few changes. We discovered a few scenarios we didn't find in our research, because again, when you research, you really don't get the full picture, especially with data. I think there's so much detail and nuance that we ended up with a 2% inaccuracy. So we went for 15% to 2%. And we also just knew that the balance is not always going to be 0. So we knew that we had to move away from this check anyways. I think it served us well in the beginning. But then what we started to check is against the actual balances. So some merchants might actually want a balance left over in their account, and that's why it's not always going to be 0. So not everyone wants a full payout. So then we introduced another check, and we found that when you actually compare to the expected balance amount, we ended up with a 97% accuracy. So there was still a little bit more work to do. And then at some point, we just got to like 99.99, and that score was just not meaningful anymore. So we started to translate our checks to give the actual number of payouts that didn't reconcile. So these are, thousands, hundreds of thousands of payouts. So the percent kind of doesn't mean much after a certain point. So now we have 100, after some iterations, some fixes, we fixed those bugs. We have 102 failing, payouts for a given day. 99.9 might sound really good, but when you're working with money and finance, it's still, there's still, it's not good enough necessarily. So we always dig into what is causing these failures, and just so we understand better on how to fix it. And then eventually, those 102 failures, they were very real. They were just more tweaks we had to make to the logic. And then we ended up, our checks would just return 2 failed payouts or 2 failed rows that didn't reconcile. So we ended up getting to a point where there really just wasn't a lot more failures. So, and then eventually, we just stopped getting alerts. Like then everything just worked. So there was just nothing more to fix at some point. And I think this way of working just worked really well, because if we looked at that graph I shared earlier, like when you're testing, you just end up with so many surprises that if you can get the results as you're working, like you just know what to focus on. It's just make the test go green. So to recap, it's always good to start with proportional checks, because you just know how far off are you from the finish line. But at some point, you just have to transition to numbers and counts, because that percentage isn't going to be very meaningful anymore. And then you basically fix bugs until there's nothing left to fix. And in some cases, like even your checks might be incorrect. So the data itself might be correct, but like the check itself is returning failures. So also have to address those. And at the very end, when we're ready and we're ready to give it to our customers, we set up alerts. So then if we have failures, if things don't look right, then we make sure someone from our team can look at it and fix it. So yeah, that is what I like to call validation-driven development, how you can apply more of a test-driven development approach in even if you're a data engineer. So yeah. Yes. Okay, so the question was, did I continuously add checks throughout this process? I did not write every single check at first. I just wrote the main one, the reconciliation one. But for this report, that was the only one we really that was the most meaningful. So the other checks did come a little bit later, like making sure that columns are not empty and stuff like that. Yeah. But we did make a lot of updates to the check. It was like first we see if it's 0, and then we just, yeah. Yes. Yeah, I think maybe something where we ran into like a floating point issue. So it was like because of we were adding incorrect types together, we just ended up with like, you know, a 10.99999 instead of like a 10 equals 10. So I think that was kind of like on our side. Is anyone familiar with floating point? Yeah, issues. Okay, with data. Yeah. So essentially there were some things like that were like, okay, we just didn't cast it to the right type. But that's the main one I can think about. Yes? Yeah, so the question was if this runs in production or not. So yeah, that's correct. Like our unit tests, we still have unit tests on top of this, by the way, just to make sure the code is correct. But validations just help us with making sure the business logic is correct. So they don't run in our pipeline right now, the way that unit tests do, but we do use them to rely on if a report is okay to give to a merchant. So if we see that we have a lot of failures, like we still use the results basically in production. Yep.
Some idea of what sort of tooling this is all around? Like, is this like SQL running somewhere? Like, how are you alerting? Like, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so the question was around tooling of this. So we like to build a lot of things in-house. We've built a lot of our frameworks on top of open source frameworks. So we primarily use Spark as our query engine in our big data platform. And we also built our own validation framework that uses Spark under the hood. And we have like a statistics library internally as well that we use. So for us, we just kind of plug and play. But you can think of it as just writing SQL queries at the end of the day, but running it against Spark. And then what we do for alerting, we can set it up so it alerts our channels, like our Mattermost is what we use. You can think of it as Slack. We do it with channels, but we also have the ability to send like a PagerDuty alert. So if it's, you know, it's an emergency, someone can take a look. Yeah, so the question was around using Great Expectations. I know that's where we started. So before I started, we were using that. I personally never used it, but I think we moved more towards our own framework because it's more configurable. Like I think with Great Expectation, you get like to define your checks as like a JSON file or something like that. Yeah, for us, like we just plug this in the code. So it's much more customizable in terms of what we want to do on failures or, you know, the type of checks we want to add. Has anyone else used Great Expectations? Okay. Yep. So the question was more around in what cases would a merchant not want their balance to be zero. So we have a banking license, like we offer bank accounts. If like let's say yeah, we also offer issuing, I should say. So issuing is like when Audion gives you like you could think of them as debit cards and then you can use them on your own. So you need a balance in order to use that card, right? So you might decide that you want to hold on to these funds because you want to use them, you know, to spend on your own, essentially. So the way that the way that we've set up our payouts is to be very flexible. So you can configure if you want to always leave a certain amount there or like what schedule you want to. But it's essentially a bank account. So, you know, we always want money in our bank account. And I think someone remote, Arush, has a question. Or is it in the chat? Can't unmute. Okay. Okay. But feel free to add also questions in the Zoom and we can get to those as well for remote folks.
Oh,
Oh,
hello.
oh, hi.
Hi, sorry if I interrupted someone there. I can't hear the audience. But my question was, what are some of the challenging problems that you're dealing with at the bank reporting team right now?
I'll get back to your question. Some of the challenges?
Yeah.
I think that you know, we are growing as a business. We're growing North America, like that's why we have an office here. So I think whenever I hear about the business doing well and like getting all these customers, like I also just think about the volume of data we also have to work with, and just how much bigger our reports are going to get. So I think for me, the challenge is always like just keeping up with the volume. It's a good problem to have, but also just thinking about how can we optimize the performance of our pipelines so then we can also not run into issues or delays with our reports.
Got it. Thank you.
And then back to your question, you were asking about the automation. Yeah, so actually you could do these checks manually as you develop, but I found that it could be prone to error if you do things manually. And not only that, but I think it's better to get the feedback as your pipeline finishes. So to give an example, there was a time we were doing our checks manually and not automated in this way. And we missed a timing issue. Like we actually didn't have the data ready by the time the pipeline finished, but our checks were manual, so we weren't catching that. So I think it's nice when you just automate things and get alerted because that's less work for you to do. But when it comes to digging into the bugs and seeing what else is failing, you do kind of have to run your checks manually and all of that. But I also think it kind of prepares you for when you go live because the goal is that you get alerted for real when this happens once you've made this product available. Yes?
Like I imagine a lot of the bugs involve like some data that's in a state, some other data that's in a state, you're like, I don't know, doing a join between them, and only then does you like when you encounter that, you copy some production data locally and then put that in your tests, or how do you avoid like the feedbacks, like long feedbacks like
Yeah, so the question was around, yeah, how do we add these checks or like how to develop the checks? Yeah. So one technology I forgot to add that we work with is Jupyter notebooks. So we have Jupyter set up in our big data platform so we can write code and test it against live data. So this allows us, like, we don't have to push our code live, but it allows us to use live data to test some of these code changes that we're trying to do. So I think that's been really great for getting the feedback and not having to wait. But then there's also kind of like a business domain question of like, how do you know what to check for? So I think that's where it is a collaboration between engineering and product, like, and other domain experts to kind of get the direction of like, okay, what's the expected outcome here? But yeah, I think that's why it's good to have the requirements and definitions up front, because then you can look out for them. Otherwise, you kind of don't know what to check for. And you don't know there's issues when there really are issues. Did that answer your question? Yes? So the question was around noisy alerts and prioritizing them. I think something that we've been doing is putting alerts in a separate channel, kind of like a testing channel. So that helps a lot. And we did that with this project. Like, we didn't want everyone to know that, you know, something was wrong. Like, you kind of have to hide it from people. I think that helps, but then you do, maybe not specifically with this project, but other projects, like I've had to update my checks to remove the scenarios that it doesn't work against, which feels manual, but then you just get less noise. Because at the end of the day, like, these should be actionable. If you see it, you should do something. So the worst thing is to have too many alerts that you can't do anything about. Cool. I will wrap it up and then welcome Rebecca on stage. And yeah, we'll also be around later for more questions.
Did you stop sharing? I think I did. Maybe, let's see if we can have you. Oh, sorry. Oh, cool. Yeah, that's pretty good. Perfect, thanks. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca. I'm a data scientist. I'm currently working at Adyen, of course, on the Data Connect team. But my presentation today has nothing to do with what I'm working on at work. And this is actually a project that I work on in my spare time and that I'm still working on. And yeah, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about it. It's a a mobile app called Aesthetic, and it merges fashion and machine learning together. So more specifically, it's a wardrobe optimization app that uses AI and weather information to suggest daily outfits for the user based on what they have in their closet. And so the first thing we want to know is, like, why is this important? Why did I even write it in the first place? And I'm sure you guys all have the experience where you're, feel like you have nothing to wear, you forget what's in your closet, so you just go and buy more clothes. And unfortunately, that's very bad for the environment. And I would say that those habits aren't very healthy habits for people in general, even outside the environment. So being able to kind of optimize your closet and being able to dress more efficiently and get the most value out of it will allow you to promote sustainability. We're buying way more clothing, keeping it as half as long, and that's unfortunately not great for the planet. Also will help you reduce decision fatigue. So this is just another decision that you can offload to a robot, so why not? And also it's a fun way to kind of use technology to help you enhance your personal style. So I'm going to be telling you a little bit about this app, but specifically I'm going to focus mostly on telling you about the different technologies, models, and APIs that it uses. And kind of the main goal of this is to kind of show you how there's a lot out there. Gen AI is booming, and data and AI in general, and there's just a lot of tools out there, and being able to use them all effectively can help you create very innovative products. So this talk is organized kind of into three different sections. The first one, the first part of the app is you have to go and download your closet into the digital closet in the app. And of course, as you can imagine, it might be a little bit tedious to go and take photos of all your clothes. So to help make it easier, there's 3 other ways to add items. One is by scanning the barcode on the tag. The other is by giving it access to your email and having it scan online order receipts. And the third is describing it and having it generate the image. And I'll go into these in more details later on. The next step of the app is the model, in order to suggest outfits, that has to really understand what the item is. It has to understand, what occasion it's for, what weather it's for. You don't want it to suggest a wool sweater when it's 90 degrees. So to help with that, there's an AI model that labels the items and adds them to specific tag types. And again, we'll go over this in more detail. And the last step is it suggests the outfits. And in order to do this, it needs to know the weather. So it uses a weather API to grab weather. And then it needs to figure out what matches together and what doesn't. So I'll go into a little bit about that. And just an FYI, if anybody has any questions during the talk, feel free to just ask, raise your hand in the middle of the talk. You don't have to wait till the end. So the first part is getting your closet into the app. And I would argue that this is probably the most important step, because as you can imagine, if a user comes in, creates an account, installs the app, and then it becomes too tedious and boring for them, they'll easily churn, they'll easily just get off it. So we need to make this as easy and as simple as we can for the user. So like I mentioned, besides them going in and taking photos of all their items, one thing they can do is they can go and scan the barcode on the tag if it's a new item. And the app can go ahead and it sends that barcode number that it scanned to a barcode lookup API, which is basically a product database that has information from mainly 3 different types of barcode types. And this way, it's an easy way to kind of add that item. But as you can imagine, this only works if it's a new item and if you still have the tag on the clothing item. So another way you can add more of your purchased items is you can give the app access to your email through a Google sign-in API. And then the app will go ahead and scan all your order emails and extract clothing relevant images. So you can kind of see an example on the side there of it working through this now. A little bit on some of the complexities with this feature in specific. One, it's very hard to test because unfortunately people they don't give me access to their emails. So I only have my own email to test this on. I asked my friends, but even they were a little reluctant to give me full access to their emails. And there's a few different steps where it can fail at. One, it can miss a relevant email, and it's really hard to catch those false negatives. So you can kind of see if it captures a wrong image, but it's hard to know what emails are there that it missed. It may label some images incorrectly or decide that the label isn't a clothing relevant label, even if it is. And as you can see in some of these examples, it sometimes extracts ads instead of the purchased item. So those are just some of the limitations of this feature, but it's a good start. And the last way to upload your clothing items is you can describe the item. So here you can see I described dark gray cashmere sweater, and it will generate an image for you. And for this, I'm using DALL-E 3, which is an AI image generator powered by OpenAI. And also, if you don't like the image that it created, you can kind of adjust the description. Here, I adjusted it to woman's cashmere sweater, and it can regenerate it. And then the user can go ahead and add that to their closet. So those are all the ways that the user can add images into their virtual closet. Yeah, is that a question? Yeah. So the question was, does OpenAI, the API, does it return images as well? Yeah, you send in a request of the text that you want to send into it, and it will send back the link to the image. And just like an FYI, here, when the user types this in, that's not the full text that I send back to the API. I'll add information on top of it. So here it says dark gray cashmere sweater, but the text that I sent to the API is create an outfit of a dark gray cashmere sweater, make it photorealistic, make the background white. So I added like a whole description to make sure that it's creating a nice image and like a relevant image for that. Yes. Yes. So the question was, why is there not an option to upload photos? There is. That's one of the options. I didn't go through that because that was the first feature that I wrote. So yeah, they can go ahead and just take photos of their items, either by selecting images from their gallery or just taking photos directly through the app. But those two methods of adding items can be really tedious. You don't want to, especially if you have a lot of clothes in your closet, you don't want to go and take photos of 500 items or 100 items or however many items you have in your closet. So these are just some ways to make it easier. Yeah? Yes. What's the question? Well, while we're waiting for the question, I'll continue and we'll go back and answer that.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Sorry. Okay, yeah. So I was
Yes.
curious, like, how do you handle things like a sweater that your grandma knitted for you? And then as far as like selecting an occasion for it, like if you're going to Christmas at your grandma's house, how would it know that like, you know, you want to wear the sweater that she knitted you to show her appreciation? And then like a secondary question on top of that,
Yeah.
is like, does it also allow for the addition of accessories as far as like necklaces or earrings or certain jewelry to go with the outfit?
Yeah, great question. So one is, what if you have a specific item you want to wear? So suggest an outfit, but maybe you have something very specific you want to wear. So actually, I give the user the option to go and replace items in the outfit. So if they don't like the item or they just want to wear something specific, they can go and replace the item. And that way they kind of have more flexibility to really, use this app how they want to use it. So yeah, does that answer your first question?
Oh yeah, so
Okay.
so it would require a manual user decision to do that, and so
Yeah.
okay, and then like as far as like the selection for like what the occasion is, like how is the item classified for like what occasion it's appropriate for? Like
Yeah,
as
so
far as
that's
like going to a business meeting, like you'd want to wear like a suit or like something more dressy.
yeah. That's a great question. And that actually takes me to the next part of the talk, which is tagging and labeling the items. So yeah, this is very important because if you're selecting an outfit for work, you don't want it to select a ball gown or a swimsuit. So yeah, it needs to be appropriate for the occasion and it needs to be appropriate for the weather. So the way it does this is it uses a computer vision model. I use Google Vision API to label the item. And then those labels are used, they're fed into other models as features to return the different tags. And there's a few different tags. There's the category. So you asked, can you add accessories? And the answer is yes. It will place the item into a category of top, bottom, dress, outerwear, hat, bag, accessory, jewelry. It'll also tag it into specific occasions. This includes casual, work, dinner, formal, swim, etc. Seasons, summer, spring, winter, fall, and style. And it'll categorize the item as, right now there's just two style tags, either as a basic piece or a statement piece. So basic is simple, solid colored, and statement is more, bright or loud or patterned. And that tag will be used by the model to kind of understand what should match with what. And of course, unfortunately, the model doesn't work perfectly, so I'll sometimes get these labels incorrectly. It's using logistic regression models to try to use these labels of what the image is and classify them in these categories, occasions, seasons. But of course, it doesn't work perfectly, so the user can go ahead and fix wherever the model messed up and manually update it. But initially, when I wrote this app, this was all manual, so the user had to manually add all these tags. And then what happened is as I was playing around with the app, adding more things to it, I accidentally introduced a bug, which happens often, unfortunately, and I accidentally wiped all my tags. So I tagged 100 items, and then they were all wiped. And I was like, I'm not retagging all that. And if I'm, as a developer who's, really excited about this app, if that sounds way too tedious for me, then obviously users are not going to love having to tag everything. So even having a model be able to accurately tag half of it or 70% of it is a great start for the user. And yeah, so then the last step is once we have the closet in the app, once they're all properly labeled and tagged, the next step is being able for the app to create outfits for the user. And there's two main features in the app. One is just the daily outfit feature. It selects a daily outfit for you. So it uses your location on your phone to know where you're at and to take the weather from there. And it just selects an outfit for you. And the other feature is if you want to create an outfit plan. So if you're traveling somewhere and you want to figure out what to pack, or if you want to pack a set of, you want to kind of decide what you're going to wear to work for the next month or 2 months, you can go ahead and do that. So here's kind of a example of a user creating outfit plans for work and for more formal occasion. And you see it creates something every day. And yeah, so this is an easy way for you to pack or just to decide what you're going to wear with less thought. But how does it do this? So the first step in it being able to suggest an outfit for you is to understand what the weather is. So it can make sure that, again, it's not selecting something too warm or too hot, what's not appropriate for the weather. So the way it does this is if it's choosing an outfit for today or for a day that's today or 5 days ahead, it uses Open Weather API to grab the weather. And then it'll use the weather description and the weather temperature to kind of determine which clothing are appropriate. However, if you're packing or planning outfits for a week in advance, a month in advance, then, we're as humans not really good at predicting the future that far ahead. But so what the app does is it goes ahead and it web scrapes historical monthly averages from the city you're planning for from Wikipedia. So here's an example of what the Wikipedia table looks like. So it'll use a historical average as its best guess of what the weather will be for that day. And then the next step, once it knows what the weather is, it needs to understand what matches with what. Right now, the algorithm it uses is a fairly simple algorithm. It mostly just uses the style tag to understand if it's an item that matches easily with other items, or if it's more of a statement piece that should only match with things that are more simple. Because you don't want to pair a Mickey Mouse sweater with cheetah pants. However, as you know, people have different styles, different tastes. So maybe some people do want to wear cheetah pants with Mickey Mouse sweater. So I kind of wrote this based on my style, but this will not apply to everybody. So the user can actually go ahead and select not a match if they don't like the outfit or like a thumbs down. And the app will record that they did not like this outfit. And in the future, with more users, with more data, the algorithm, we could create a much more complex recommendation model. And not only will it be a more sophisticated model, but it'll also be able to learn what the user likes, what it doesn't like, and be able to adjust the model based on that feedback, which again is very important because again, people have different tastes and styles. So that's the future, hopefully. And yeah, that's kind of very quickly how the model works and all the models and APIs and technologies it uses. Questions? Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, well, so I'm the only one that's been working on this. So yeah, I'll sometimes have like strange bugs or strange things that I'll like add a new feature or add something new, and it will affect something else that I didn't think about. So yeah, that happens, unfortunately. Well, there was a time when by accident it was, well, so right now it uses the weather to kind of show you an outfit. But what was happening, if it's unable to like get the weather information, it'll still suggest an outfit, but it just won't use the weather information. So it'll just choose any outfit. But the problem, what was happening before, is it would maybe, pair a sweater with like flip-flops and shorts. So I went back and I changed it that it will choose a random outfit, but the items should all be in the same season. So a sweater and flip-flops shouldn't match together because there's, I don't know in what situation you would do that. So yeah, there was a moment where it was suggesting some really weird, strange things, or like a formal dress with sneakers or flip-flops or weird things like that. So I changed it so that the outfits are always cohesive. The outfits are always the same season and the same occasion. So you won't have cases like that. Yeah. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Does your app take into account if your t-shirt is in the laundry?
Yeah, so the question is, does the app take into account if your clothing's in the laundry? At the moment, it doesn't, but maybe a future feature for the app. Yeah. So right now, like I mentioned, the algorithm's using a pretty simple recommendation algorithm. So right now it's collecting data of if the user liked or disliked the item. But the model is not using that information yet. So in the future, once again, there's more users and more data, we'll be able to use that in a more complex model. Yes. Yeah, no problem. Yeah. Great question. So the question was, what if your style changes and you have one specific style, you want to wear cheetah pants with Mickey Mouse, and then you decide to have a different, more toned down style? That's actually a really great question. So in those cases, I feel like there'll be kind of two sets of users, a subset of users who are kind of using this app more to enhance their personal style and to really figure out what looks good together. And other users who already know their style, already know what they like, what they don't like. So they'll just be using it to kind of suggest outfits, but ideally suggest outfits that they like. So potentially we can use this app in the future against when some models more complex, where the user can decide like whether they want to enhance their style, and then it can suggest things that are more like that the model globally decides is a good match. Or so basically we can decide whether to use the user's feedback in that system, in that algorithm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Your personal project.
Yeah.
So I just curious how far fetched this relates to your work.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, this is a personal project, and how closely is this related to my work at Adyen? So I work as a data scientist at Adyen, and Adyen is in the finance space, kind of different than the fashion space. But in terms of the technologies that this app uses, these are a lot of, of the same models that I'm using here at Adyen as well. And so a lot of the data side of this project, even though it's in a different field and a completely different type of project, a lot of what it uses are tools that I use here at Adyen as well. Yeah. And that's the one like kind of nice thing about data is, you know, once you have the skills to know how to really use and manipulate and play with the data, you can kind of apply that to different industries. And before Addie and I worked in the healthcare space, before that in the like logistics supply chain space. So I worked in different industries, but always within data. Yes. Yeah, so the question was, sorry, let me make sure that I understand the question correctly. You're asking if kind of how this is connected to recycling and sustainability and all that. So mainly I think this is just a good way to help people. I think when you're using this app, you remember like certain items that you forget you have in your closet. If it like recommends an item, you're less likely to go and need to buy more clothes. And even just seeing all the clothes virtually on your app, it makes you realize just how much you already have. So I think just using it helps with sustainability where people are less likely to go out and buy more clothes when they don't really need it. If you're talking about more directly, at the moment, no, it's just, suggesting outfits for you, but in the future, once if it's growing, we can incorporate things where you can have an option to donate it to potential users on the site. You can kind of turn into more of a community. So yeah, so I can easily envision it going in that direction as it grows. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I was actually just thinking about that. I was thinking about that yesterday or before yesterday because it was raining. And rain is interesting because it gets a little bit warmer when it rains actually, but wetter. So it's hard to, yeah, at the moment it doesn't, but that's a great suggestion and something I realized yesterday that it should do. But it's hard because right now it's uses for seasons, and I'm trying to figure out a nice way to add rain into a season. Open APIs about what? Weather APIs? So it does use a weather API, but it uses a weather API for 5 days in advance because the API only returns weather information for up to 5 days. And then, like I mentioned, if it's past 5 days, it uses historical averages. Yeah. But then we need like the app has that information, but we need to know how to use that information effectively. So right now what it does is it uses the description, weather description and the weather temperature. So it'll see if it's cloudy, if it's rainy, and it'll use that to kind of determine what season it falls into. But rainy is a little bit more difficult. But right now, if it's rainy, it just says it's in the fall category, but fall rainy and fall not rainy slightly different. So we'll think of how to improve that. Yes.
You can try using this. It might work. What is this? Oh, I thought. Okay. I wonder if you want to try like the scraping kind of fashion website and do computer vision on the outfit there and like I don't know, do like clustering algorithms on the the photos and generate recommendation that way.
Wait, from where?
Like to generate a recommendation from the clusters of like the feature of fashion website.
Oh,
photos.
yeah. So so one of the difficulties when I was building this app is it's actually not that easy to find labeled data sets of clothing items and like labeled to what matches and what doesn't match. So the way that you can do this is by just getting images from Pinterest or fashion sites and then picking out the items in there. But then you still need somebody. You can kind of, it's a much more complex process than just having a data set. So yeah, that's in the future as I figure out easier ways to do that. Yes.
But to his point, like
Yeah.
you could have like a scraping through Macy's,
Yeah.
and if you don't have like a jacket that it wants to recommend, maybe you can just put an ad for the Macy's product. helps you to monetize maybe.
So that's a great point in how to monetize it. But if the point is to get users to shop less and with the sustainability, so there's definitely, but yeah, that is potentially a way to monetize it. Or, I was thinking of just like reaching out to companies and having them put their catalogs in the app so it's easier to add items or things like that. Or I was thinking to be able to monetize it, but keep it in the sustainability sphere to recommend things from thrift shops or sustainable companies or things like that to make sure that I'm not driving too far from the mission statement. Yeah. Mhm. So, so basically, to recap, what the question is, it's how do I kind of see the accuracy of the different models it uses? Oh, yeah. So I chose well, there's a bunch of different models in the app, but for the model that tags and labels the items, I use logistic regression models. And the reason is kind of a silly reason, and that's because I wrote everything in Python, and then this I wrote in Flutter and Dart, and I was having trouble figuring out how to move models from Python to Flutter. So I was having like a technical difficulty. So I chose logistic regression because it's just an equation. So it was easier to move it. And the other models I use, like Google Vision API. So I had like a TensorFlow model that I built that was trying to predict the style. That was working. I had a labeled data set, so it was working like surprisingly better than I expected. And then I was having trouble figuring out how to move TensorFlow model into Flutter. And in the end, I just decided to use Google Vision API because I decided they probably do a way better job than I did and probably have way more labels. And it also just made me realize how many tools are out there and decided not to reinvent the wheel and just use tools that are trained on way more data than I can find. Yeah. So keep in mind, this is like so the question was how often do I update the models? So this is a very new app and a lot of these models I just added in. So the labeling the tags, I just added in like less than a month ago. So the answer is once. But I had a coworker and my friend Alona test the app for me. So she made sure to send me every time the model was failing. So the model is not performing perfectly, but I'm hoping to, once again, once I have more users or even I just tag a few more items to replace the model with a better performance model. Yeah.
Why don't you use an existing like available API model, like a large language model, do that labeling, or just post your own content?
So I do kind of. So the way that the labeling works is I use the Google Vision API to label it, but it labels it, it won't just label clothing, it'll label it everything. So then once it labels this, I take out all the clothing relevant labels, which I predefined. So if it has something like skin as a label, which it sometimes does if you're putting in like a photo that's of a model with a shirt, or cat, if there's a cat on the shirt, it won't use those labels, but it'll use all the other labels that are relevant. And then those labels are used as features into the models that I wrote that then classifies those labels into occasions and seasons. So for example, if the Google Image API, Google Vision API, sorry, labels it as denim, it will, then my model will take that denim and classify it as more likely as being a casual item and less likely as being a formal item, for example, or more likely in being, if it's shorts, it'll classify it as more likely being a summer label instead of a winter label. So it uses kind of two models on top of each other.
Why your own model as opposed to like you could chain that up, put a Google Vision API that's tell I don't know, OpenAI or something like, hey,
Oh, like an LLM. That's a good idea, actually. I'll update that. I haven't tried that. I don't know how well I haven't played around with like LLMs that much, aside from adding kind of Dolly into here. I would have to play around with it and see how well it works. But yeah, that might be a good option. And also, one thing you also have to consider is you want it to work a little bit faster. So if the LLMs are adding a lot of time, you don't want a user to get bored or sign out of the app. But I'll play around with that idea. Thanks. Yeah.
So just adding on to the sustainability part, have you considered maybe adding the maintenance aspect of the clothes? For example, I had like a really nice winter jacket. I hit like something sharp, and that made a tiny rip in it. Usually, they don't companies don't tell you how to repair these sort of things, and so it took me a really long time of searching through the web and finding specific parts to fix that jacket and how I would do that. So maybe including that also be something you would
Yeah, so that's an option. Once, like, I think I wanted to create this app to kind of do one feature really well before I started adding in more features. Because as an engineer, what happens is I started working on it. I'm like, oh, I want to add this and I want to add that, and I started adding things, and then things start breaking, and there are bugs, and they're all working at 70% instead of having one thing work at 100. So yeah, so those are all great ideas, but I think I'll add those in once everything here is working at 100%. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question is, where do I store the images? I use Firebase right now. And before it's stored, I'll shrink the item to a specific size, because one of the first problems I came across while working this up is I ran out of memory, and then it's whatever. So yeah, I had to make sure to take those into account. Firebase. I was just looking at, well, I was using them for authentication, so for the login process. And so it's just easy, if I was already using them, to also use them for storage. And they work well for my use case. I might in the future, if hopefully, ideally, I get too much users and I need something a little bit like with more storage, I might switch to, yeah, something else. But for now, it works for my use case. Yes. Yeah, so I actually use this app a lot. And actually, I wrote it because I wanted an app like this. And actually, a few years ago, I think like 10 years ago, I found an app like this, and I uploaded all my clothes. And it was a simple version. It didn't have like machine learning or whatever, but it let you create a virtual closet and just like create outfits yourself. And then after all that, it ceased existing. And then I was very annoyed, and I could never find one that did this. So I decided to try it for myself. So yeah, I use it a lot. And yes, I used it today when getting dressed. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, how do I find the data and how do I train the models now? So when I just first started developing it, I went on Kaggle and tried to find data there. But like I mentioned, there's unfortunately not that much labeled clothing data. And the ones that are labeled are usually labeled for product purposes, not for like this purposes. So that was actually one of the difficulties, is finding the data. Right now, because I use it often, I use my own labels as labels. So like I put in my clothing and I labeled all of them. So that's what I use for like the labeling logistic regression models. And yeah, it's not the best because I'm one person. And yeah, so for the matching, it's, again, right now the model is a pretty simple rules-based heuristics model. So it's not using a super complex machine learning model. So right now, the algorithm, the way it works is I wrote rules that says if it was labeled as a basic item, it could match to anything. And if it was labeled as a statement piece, it can only match to other basic pieces. So it's fairly simple, and it's just kind of how I determined what should match together. Because unfortunately, I don't have enough data to make this model a little bit more complex the way I want to just yet. Yes. Yeah. It might be. I don't even remember, but yeah, it's highly likely. It sounds familiar. Did you have the same issue? Did you spend 5 hours? Okay, I won't get rid of this, I promise. Yeah. 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 Yeah, so that's a great question. She asked, would I add here like sustainability metrics? So that's actually a feature I'm working on, is a closet analysis. It's almost done, a closet analysis feature. And I'll show you data about your closet, but I'll also show you right now when you're adding the items in addition to the tags. Hold on, let me actually show you if you can see it. Here, besides the tags, you can also add information about details about the brand, the date when you purchased it, and like whatever other information. So, and when you're creating the outfits. So I have information on how often you're wearing it. So yes, I'm planning to, congrats, you've been, wearing this, blah, blah. Or if you have too many items in your closet, even say, hey, you have this many outfits that you can create. There are only 365 days in the year. So yeah. Yeah, it's a good idea. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, how can you know if they actually wore it or if it was just recommended? So I'm also working on another feature that's called like adding the outfit of the day. So if it's suggested, you can click that you wore it and it will save that it was worn on that day. And that's how I'll have those metrics in the future. Also half done. Yeah. Yeah. So it started out as a fun project. So what happened was I got laid off from Google and I had way too much spare time. So I'm like, oh, I'm gonna start working on this and teaching myself mobile development because I'm a data scientist. I actually never knew how to code mobile apps before. So that's when I had a lot of free time. And I'm like, oh, I'll do it as a fun project and hopefully it'll help me get a job. And maybe that's why I'm here at Adyen. And then I got more and more obsessive and started adding to it and building it more. And, I had people be like, oh, you should do something with this. You should put it on the App Store. So it's currently in the App Store. That's the QR code if you want to install it and use it. So right now I'm actually trying to take this potentially somewhere further. But the first step, I think, is just finding, before trying to find funding or investment, really just getting more users to really build it out more. So that's kind of like my next step is just users and marketing it, which is, you guys are the step one. Yeah. So right now it has around 100 users, not a lot. But also we should keep in mind that it depends how you define users. Because there's, users that are like, oh, this sounds so cool. They download it and like, oh, I'm definitely going to use this. And then they never open it again. So it has around 100 users, but probably much less active users. But yeah, so. And I also, to add to that, I also didn't want to start actively marketing this app before I knew that, it's free of bugs and this and that. So yeah, I was waiting for it to be in a good place before. Yes. Yeah.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so I was curious if like all you have in your wardrobe is like t-shirts or sweaters,
Mhm.
maybe a couple hoodies or like some different jackets and stuff like that.
Yeah.
If it's too cold for a t-shirt but too warm for a sweater, so like spring or fall type of
Yeah.
weather,
Yeah.
like how do you implement or does it implement like wear a t-shirt with like an open sweater, which would be like a medium temperature in between the two potential extremes, you know?
Yeah. So, well, the item is tagged in a specific season. So if that item is tagged, and of course the user again can adjust it. So it also depends what the user likes to wear. So if the user runs hot and wears t-shirts when it's chilly, they can tag it as, a t-shirt as a fall item or maybe even a winter item. Hopefully no one's wearing t-shirts in the winter, but so it depends how the user is labeling and tagging these items. But also if, for example, someone went ahead and uploaded all their winter clothes and then it's summer and they didn't upload any summer clothes, the app will say, hey, we couldn't find an outfit for this weather. So it'll show you, please add more items to the closet.
Okay. And then to speak to that type of scenario, and I know someone had mentioned something about like donating clothes that you don't need. Like, has there been any thought or like how difficult would the implementation be to connect people who want to donate clothes to where you find a scenario where someone only has summer clothes or only winter clothes and they're in need of a particular item, to connect those people in like a similar area where it's like, you don't have this, but this like these items are up for like donation in your area. Would you like to connect with someone and go pick it up or like meet someplace to like get the item or some like along the lines like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think like what I envision kind of for the future of this app is I think apps get a lot more traction when it's kind of community based. So, or like social media based. So being able to potentially kind of allow you to add followers or add friends within this app. And then that creating a community from that will make it a lot easier to then add features like this person's missing these items. Do you want to donate? You have too many of this. Do you want to donate, or creating those kind of features and options in the app?
Yeah, kind of like a donation marketplace. So even like
Yeah.
people on there could see it, and it'd almost be like a free version of Goodwill.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in the future, again, I want to make sure that any feature that I'm building, that it's working at like 100% or like at 90% before I start adding other features, because I don't want to create like a bunch of features that aren't working great.
Oh, for sure. And then I guess like to expand on that just a little bit, like how would you envision like somehow trying to implement it so that there weren't like sharks just like going onto that, or like once it did, and maybe I'm just like thinking in like scope creep,
Yeah.
but like people who would just go on to get like the free clothes and then like turn around and like sell them like on eBay or somewhere else.
Yeah, that's a good
That might be
question.
impossible to even try to like combat or avoid.
Yeah, which that can happen, but I feel like that's I mean, that's true of any sort of like, people put out books for free, please grab one. And of course, someone can go and just take all the books and then try to sell them. So I think sometimes you just have to like take the risk and just hope that people are generally decent humans.
Yeah, there's goodwill in the community. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully,
No, I
yeah.
feel that.
Yeah.
All right. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, have I tried using no code tools to create it? I considered it at first because again, I'm a data scientist. I didn't have mobile development skills. So at first I was like, I forgot what it's called. Oh, Flutter Flow, I think was what I was considering. And then I'm like, this is very complicated to learn. I'd rather just learn to code. So I just taught myself to code instead of using no code tools. And that, yeah, I thought was a better option. Yeah. And I think it's like a great tool for non-engineers, but also I would potentially also recommend non-engineers who want to build engineering tools to just learn engineering. That's my philosophy and perspective. And it's just FYI to people who want to do that. It's a lot less scary than it sounds. Like people view like, oh, engineering, like I need to go to school and learn for 4 years. And honestly, if there's like courses online and this or that, and it's not as scary to learn new skill sets as people think in their minds, me included. Like I remember I was like, oh, I can't like code a mobile app. I don't have time to go back to school and this or that. And then I'm like, no, I can do it. Any other questions? Cool. Thank you so much.